So rubrics make an excellent resource which you can use for both markers and students, which provide a single point of reference with all of the marking criteria that are going to be used to award grades on that particular assessment. And you can see this is just one example of how to approach rubrics. It will look reasonably similar to this. But we have the marking criteria as one marking, so broken up into the different rows of this sort of table, and then we've got a short paragraph in each of the different columns to explain for that particular marking criterion what a fail looks like, all the way through to what outstanding work looks like in a first. And so the student can use this not only to understand more clearly what's required of them when they're doing their planning when they're starting work on an assessment, but they can also use it to self-audit their work before they submit, to get a feel of where they are for each of the different areas of the marking criteria. And then once the academic staff member has done the marking of their work using the rubric, the student then has a nicely broken up set of criteria which they can see that the academic has judged their work as for each of those different marking areas. And so the marking areas might be learning outcomes you use for the module. They could be specific criteria such as referencing and presentation, or they could be more specific marking criteria for that assessment. For instance, if you're doing a rubric for a Viva assessment, or for a presentation and some slides. So one of the things which I think most academics will find themselves guilty of is we have an awful lot of terms that we use in common parlance, and they make an awful lot of sense to us but may not make an awful lot of sense to the students. And so we expect the student to understand some of these academic terms, but we can minimise some of the difficulties they have in understanding the academic terms we put in our rubrics to describe different levels of work, by either providing some kind of separate resource which explains some of those terms, talking about some of those terms in assignment prep sessions that you do prior to the students undertaking the assignment or assessment, or we can provide the student with a rubric which has a minimum amount of these academic terms in and explains them more in layman's terms. And so just have a think about how comprehensible the contents of the rubric are going to be for a layperson when you're writing out your rubrics for the first time. It's much easier to write a rubric if you already have a year's worth of assessments to work from, as you've already had a look at low scoring, middle and high scoring pieces of work, and can have an idea of the things which we're seeing in a poorly scoring piece of work, and the things that are seen in a middle scoring piece of work, and the things that are seen in a high scoring piece of work. And so that makes it much easier to be able to come up with these short phrases to put your rubric together for the first time. Do take some time of your first rubric. The first one will take quite some time to produce, but then after that they get much easier to create. And I'd certainly recommend trying to borrow completed rubrics from colleagues for a similar academic level, in order to give yourself a starting point to work from when you're creating your first rubrics. Have a think about where you put the dividers for your rubrics. We spend a lot of time in our rubrics describing what is a third or a minor fail, what is a 2-2, a 2-1 and a first, or the equivalent at master's level. But then we don't spend an awful lot of time breaking up the big percentage brackets that we have from 0% up till the threshold mark for passing, so 40 or 50%. That's often just a single column in your rubric. The same goes for if we're looking at firsts, and so you've got distinctions where you've got a full 30% that's just one big lump in your rubric. So do have a think about breaking those up. It's not only helpful for the student, but it's also helpful to encourage the staff member doing the marking to mark that assessment across the full breadth of the marking grade bands. If you're coming up with your first rubrics, and periodically to check your existing rubrics, you should go back to the academic handbook and have a look at the marking criteria for different levels of work, the grade band descriptors, and benchmark your own rubrics against those, just to make sure that you're in the right sort of ballpark for the rubrics that you're using on your particular degree course or courses. And finally, you can score using rubrics. You can either use the rubrics with a scoring function attached, and we'll talk about that in another section of this e-lesson, or you can talk about using, or you can have the rubrics. So you can have the rubrics either as a direct guide for just the different marking criteria, or you can attach scoring to them and use the rubric to determine the ultimate grade for the assessment. So here is an example of something that could be quite helpful in writing your rubrics. There are different types of taxonomies that you can use. Bloom's or the Krathwohl for attitude towards things, or Dreyfus has also done another rubric looking for skill acquisition, but Bloom's or Solo taxonomy is probably the most commonly used one, and it can be quite helpful to sew your rubric with some of these terms, again with that caveat that you may need to explain what you're referring to your student. So when you're creating your rubric, start off by doing a clear fail and fill in your left-hand column. Then come up with your criteria for outstanding work, clear first. And then once you've got those two ends of it sorted out, then have a think about, then it becomes much more straightforward to start filling in from the sides and moving inwards the different levels of work between them. And so for that you end up with gradually filling up all of the boxes as you either move from fail through to outstanding, or you creep in from either side, and you manage to demonstrate quite clearly what the difference is between adequate work, acceptable work, good quality work and excellent work in each of your different levels. And you'll find that you start to use some pretty similar terms across quite a few of your rubrics. So like I say, once you've done one, then it's much more straightforward to do other ones afterwards.